Okay, we appreciate everybody being here this evening. We're in the book of Esther. We're in chapter 5, and we'll begin tonight at verse 9. Just by way of quick reminder, Haman has developed his plan to get rid of all of the Jewish people, to have all of them put to death. He's gotten permission from the king for that. Mordecai, when he learns about it, is terribly stricken by it, and he gets word to Esther about this, about what's happening, for her to use her situation as the queen, to be able to use that as a means for helping to save God's people. And he points out, the providential care of God, that who knows, he says, but what God has put you in this position for this very purpose. So she agrees to do it, but she wants everybody all of the Jews there in Susa, to fast for 3 days while she and her maids are going to be fasting. And at the end of that 3 days, she will go into the king, and she does so. And he extends to her the golden scepter, so her life is spared, and she comes in, and he wants to know, what is it, Esther, that you want, and I'll give it to you up to half of my kingdom. But she doesn't tell him specifically then what she wants. Rather, she postpones it. And she says, I'd like for you and Haman to come to a second dinner tomorrow night, and at that time I'll make known to you the request that I have. And so that's where we've gotten to here. And so we're in that point in between that first dinner and the second dinner, and the things that went on that helped to lead to her request being successful. And it's really a number of things here that we want to talk about. So we begin looking at verse 9 of this and just reading through verse 12. It says, And Haman went out that day, joyful and glad of heart. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, that he neither rose nor trembled before him, he was filled with wrath against Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself and went home, and he sent and fetched his friends and his wife Zeresh. And Haman recounted to them the splendor of his riches, the number of his sons, all the promotions with which the king had honored him, and how he had advanced him above the princes and the servants of the king. And Haman added, Even Queen Esther, let no one come with the king to the banquet she prepared but myself. And tomorrow also I am invited by her together with the king. So a second dinner is being prepared here. And to look at this and what's going on here, Haman at this time is enjoying an unprecedented rise to fame. You just stop to think about this. There's very few people in history are going to have success like Haman's had, and to have it so quickly. And he talks here at length. He calls his friends together and his wife, and just goes over with them all of the things that he has received, all these great things that are happening to him. Maybe being a little boastful about it, bragging about it, but he mentions a number of things as to why he is so happy here. This is the highlight of his life. Number one, he points out his riches. And we talked about that earlier. He had mentioned the fact in getting the king's approval to put to death all the Jews, he told the king, I have 10,000 talents of silver that I will put into the king's treasury. And the king says, you in essence, you keep the money and do with those people whatever it is you want to do with them. And we talked about that. 10,000 talents of silver. Roughly, in our money today, that might be around $178,320,000. So one of the things he's happy about is that wealth he's able to retain, to keep all of that money for himself. Or it's a possibility that money he had, probably he didn't have it at the time, but maybe he's thinking about that money he's going to get from the Jews. Because when the Jews are killed, all of that wealth that they have is going to be left, and I'll get that for myself. And he'd be willing to give that to the king, but the king says, you keep the money. And so he's got all that wealth now that he hadn't had before, maybe. And he's thinking about that as one of the reasons why he's happy and rejoicing with it. Then the fact that he has numerous sons. Do you know how many sons he had? The Bible tells us here, but it doesn't tell us in this chapter. He had 10 sons. Now, one of the things about it, I don't have this passage on there, but someone turn to Psalms 127. Psalms 127, and I'd like for you to read verses 3 through 5. Someone's got that, raise your hand. Let me. Okay, Brother Darnell, fine.
Behold, children are a heritage from the Lord, the fruit of the womb a reward. Like arrows in the hand of a warrior are the children of one's youth. Blessed is the man who fills his quiver with them. He shall not be put to shame when he speaks to his enemies in the gate.
Okay. A blessing from God to have children, but sons. And blessed is the man that has his quiver full. You know, and here's a man that's got 10 sons. And you know, you think about it so many times in the Bible, you know, the importance of being able to have children. And when women were unable to bear children, it was always a burden for them to bear because they were looked down upon and they were insulted many times because of their not having children. And a man was really honored when he had sons. Someone not just to pass on the name, but someone to take the lead in the family. And here's a man that's got 10 sons. And so that's something else that he has to brag about, to boast about, to be happy about. Not just his wealth, but the fact that he has 10 sons. And then, well, I had to pass it up there after all. Then his promotions he talks about that he's received. Now, he doesn't specify here what they are, but he just makes a statement. He says, all the promotions with which the king had honored him. So he uses the plural. It's not just one promotion he's received, but evidently there's been numerous promotions he has received from the king. And so he's making rapid advancements there in the kingdom. And so that's something to be happy about. And then the last thing he points out, that his position that he has now is higher than all the princes in the kingdom of Persia. How many provinces were in the kingdom of Persia at this time? How many? 127. And every one of them had a governor that ruled that particular province. And then they had princes and so forth in there. Well, guess who's head over all of them? Haman. He's been what some of the commentaries I saw said he's kind of like being the prime minister. You know, the only one that's higher than him is the king himself. And so he's been advanced to this. And so, you know, just recounting all these successes he had. And, you know, I think it's a good thing for people in life if we would just sit down, you know, and count the blessings that we have. We've seen the song about that and just stop to realize how God has blessed every one of us in so many ways. And Haman, whether or not he doesn't recognize God, but he does recognize he's got all these blessings that he has in life, all these things that's happening to him that have been great for him. And yet, in spite of all of that, there's one thing keeping him from enjoying it. You know, when he comes home and he talks to the wife, well, there's one other honor I could mention here, I need to put up there. Yeah, the honor that he's received from the queen. The queen's given a dinner, but it's kind of a private dinner. And the number of people invited is very exclusive. In fact, this dinner is so exclusive, she only invites 2 people to it. And one of them is the king, her husband. And the other one is Haman. And so that's something he brags about. You know, the queen only invited me and the king to this dinner. And guess what? She's planning another dinner tomorrow. And it's going to be just as exclusive. It's just going to be me and the king again, invited to that dinner. And so again, that's something he has to boast about, you know. And it's a reason for this man to be happy, you would think. He's got all of these things being provided for him. And we need to do that. We need to count our blessings to remind ourselves of how God has cared for us in life. But in spite of all of that, what happens to Haman, and if we're not careful, happens to us, he can't enjoy any of it. He says, yet all of this avails me nothing, so long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate. All the people in the land of Persia have been commanded by the king that they're to bow before Haman. And evidently everybody has, except one man. And that one man's refusal to bow before Haman causes Haman to be angry, to be upset. He said, I cannot, all these blessings that I've talked about, all these important things that have happened to me, I can't enjoy any of it because Mordecai, that man is still there. And this is what's troubling him. And his problem is really a problem of pride. And I want us to stop here just for a moment to talk about the dangers of that, about pride. Not only the danger of it, but the foolishness of pride that he has here. As we said, he's been enjoying unprecedented rise to fame, to power, to riches and honor. He's got all of that, but the thing that keeps him from really enjoying it is his pride. Because everybody ought to be bowing down to me. Or everybody ought to be honoring me. The king's commanded it. But one man has refused to do that. And because of that, I can't be happy. I can't enjoy the things that I've got. And so he's really troubled by that as to what he's going to do. It's his pride keeping him from it. And look at the danger of this in life. So many passages in the Bible. Proverbs 16:18 says, pride goes before destruction and a haughty spirit before a fall. Well, if that's the case, what do you think is going to happen to Haman? It's coming. And it's going to be a tremendous fall for this man. And not just for himself, but for his family. But it's that pride that's leading to that. Because of it, he cannot be happy. Again, look at those two passages about that. Here's all the things that he's got and all the ways he's been honored, but it avails nothing because of Mordecai. You know, if we're not careful sometimes, we can let little things like that offend our pride and keep us from being what we need to be and from living the way God wants us to live. I came across a story, and I've talked about this before. I know I've used it in a sermon before, but I thought it was something that really illustrated well about that. First of all, in the Bible itself, there is a king of Judah by the name of Uzziah. I don't know if you recall much about him, but he became king of Judah at the age of 16. Now, if somebody becomes a king at age 16, what's the danger in that? What's the personal danger to that person? Yeah, go to his head, 16 years old and I'm ruling the whole country. Here in America, at 16, you can't even vote. You've just gotten to the age where you can get a driver's license. And here's a man that's a king of the country. And not only that, but he rules as king for 52 years. How long did Saul serve as king? 40 years. How long did David serve as king? 47, 40 years. Well, 7 years in Hebron and 33 in Jerusalem, a total of 40. How many years did Solomon reign as king? 40. And this man serves as king for 52 years, from the time that he's 16 years of age. And eventually, it got to him. Pride that he had. 2 Chronicles chapter 26 and verse 16 says, but when he was strong, he grew proud to his destruction. For he was false to the Lord his God and entered the temple of the Lord to burn incense on the altar of incense. Now, he's confronted when he does that. He's confronted by the priest. I think 80 priests come together to oppose him and to tell him what he is doing is not right and it's not going to gain him any honor from God, and they're trying to get him to leave. But he's there, and he's got that incense with him and the coals to burn that incense on the altar. But who has the right to burn incense in the altar of God? The priest. That's a job that God's given to the priest, not to the king, but he's determined that he's going to do it. And because of that, God strikes him with leprosy. I mean, immediately, leprosy appears on his head. And then the priest usher him out. But this time the Bible says he was eager to go because he knew that this had come from God. Because of his pride, he thought, I'm the king, I'll do what I want to do. And I'll go, if I want to burn incense to God, I'll do that because I'm the king. And so that pride that he had and the position he maintained, he did that. And in 2 Chronicles 26 and verse 21, says, King Uzziah was a leper until the day of his death. He dwelt in an isolated house because he was a leper, for he was cut off from the house of the Lord. Then Jotham, his son, was over the king's house, judging the people of the land. So the rest of his life, he had to spend as a leper, living in a separate house, couldn't have any contact with them, could not go into the temple. All of that's denied to him because of the pride that he had. The other pride I want to talk about is an illustration of the fact that pride has no special place of abode. When you think about a person being prideful, why would a person be prideful? What are some of the things that make a person be filled with pride? Wealth. Yeah, all the money they have that feel like, boy, I'm better than anybody else. I prove my success by the wealth that I've gained, and I can do more than they can and everything because of the wealth that I've got. What are some of the other things that might cause a person to be filled with pride? His position he has. Maybe he's in one of those positions where he's superior to another people. That is, he's the boss of several people. He's over them. And that can cause pride in a person. But pride doesn't have to be just for those that are wealthy or those that are powerful. Pride can be found in any individual. And there was a gentleman by the name years and years ago, an ancient Greek philosopher. He was a leader of the Cynics. His name was Diogenes. And the Cynics believed in living a lifestyle of poverty. And one day Diogenes had seen a snail. It had the shell on its back, saw that crawling along the ground. And he thought, that snail has his own house with him, and he carries it with him everywhere he goes. So he went out and found him an old tub, and he put that up over his shoulder. And he carried that tub with him everywhere he went. That was his home. And according to history, the cloak that he wore was filled with holes because he lived in poverty. And Socrates reportedly said to him, I see your vanity through the holes in your cloak. Here's a man that's poor, and we're like, boy, he's got nothing to be proud of. But he was proud. And Socrates said, I can see that. It shows through the holes in your clothes. You're proud. You're as proud of that tub you're living in as any rich man in a spatial palace. You've got that pride in you. And that can happen to anybody. Pride was the downfall of Satan. A couple of passages in 1 Timothy chapter 3, when Paul is giving the qualifications for one who would serve as an elder. And one of the qualifications was that if you wanted to be an elder, you couldn't be a novice. You couldn't be a beginner. You don't want to be someone that's just become a Christian and be made an elder. And then one of the reasons, again, why is because of the pride that could cause. In fact, when Paul talks about it in verse 6, he says, not a novice, lest being puffed up with pride, he fall into the same condemnation as the devil. Now, this is one instance in the Bible where we know something about the downfall of Satan was his pride. Now, men have developed that and, have their own ideas about it, how that, Satan would rather rule in hell than serve in heaven because of his pride. He didn't want to be under anybody, supposedly. But I don't know what all is involved in it, but the Bible does tell us that was the condemnation of the devil, was his pride that he had. And that's why you shouldn't appoint a man to be an elder who's a novice, who's just a new beginner in Christianity, lest he be lifted up with pride like that. And then John's statement in 1 John 2:16, he says, for all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life is not of the Father, but is of the world. The pride of life is not something that comes to you from God. It's not one of the fruits of the Spirit. Pride is something of the world. It's not of God. And so pride is something that's dangerous. We need to be aware of that. And this man, Haman, has become filled with pride because of all that has come to him. And that pride erupts because he has one person that's not willing to show him the respect by bowing down to him. And so that's what's going to lead to his downfall. Now, in this next section here, again, we see the evidence of the providence of God. We've already seen that already. We've talked about it. And that's what Mordecai is convinced of. That he says, at least his belief, to Esther, who knows but whether God's brought you to the kingdom for such a time as this. This could be the workings of God. He's convinced that God's going to deliver Israel one way or another. If Esther doesn't want to be a part of it and use her position for that, then she and her family will be destroyed. But God will raise up salvation from another source, another way that He's going to deliver His people. And so the providence of God is going to be seen again. Verse 14 and going through chapter 6 and verse 5 as we look at those passages. Beginning at verse 14, after Haman has gone back and reported all this, talked to his family about what all's happened, but he can't enjoy it because of Mordecai. Then his wife Zeresh and all his friends said to him, "Let a gallows be made 50 cubits high, and in the morning suggest to the king that Mordecai be hanged on it. Then go merrily with the king to the banquet." And the thing pleased Haman, so he had the gallows made. That night the king could not sleep. So one was commanded to bring the book of the records of the Chronicles, and they were read before the king. And it was found written that Mordecai had told Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs, the doorkeepers who had sought to lay hands on Ahasuerus. Then the king says, "What honor or dignity has been bestowed on Mordecai for this?" And the king's servants who attended him said, "Nothing has been done for him." So the king said, "Who is in the court?" Now Haman had just entered the outer court of the king's palace to suggest that the king hang Mordecai on the gallows that he had prepared for him. The king's servant said to him, "Haman is here, standing in the court." And the king said, "Let him come in." And I really believe that in all of this, there is the working of the providence of God in all these things that happen. First of all, Haman's wife and his friends told him to have the gallows built. Now, when I read over this time, and I've taught the book before, but never thought about this before, but this time when I read this, I thought of another instance in the Bible. An instance in the life of King Ahab and his wife Jezebel. It was a time when Ahab noticed a vineyard that was owned by Naboth, and it was right near the king's palace. And the king decided he wanted that vineyard, and so he called Naboth and spoke to him and said, I want that vineyard you got, and I'm willing to exchange. I'll give you a better vineyard in exchange for yours, or if that's not satisfying, if you want money for it, I'll pay you cash for what you say your vineyard is worth. And Naboth turned him down. Naboth said, "God forbid that I should give up my father's inheritance that we've received and give that away." And so Ahab became angry. Kind of reminds me of Haman in that. He goes home. When he went home, what did he do? What? He pouted. Yeah, he laid on his bed and he turned his face away. Didn't want anybody speaking to him. Didn't want to talk to them because of that. And in comes his wife. And what's wrong with you? And why are you like this? And so he explains to her what's happened. But Jezebel, his wife, came to him and said to him, "Why is your spirit so sullen that you eat no food?" He said to her, "Because I spoke to Naboth the Jezreelite and said to him, 'Give me your vineyard for money, or else if it pleases you, I will give you another vineyard for it.' And he answered, 'I will not give you my vineyard.' Then Jezebel, his wife, said to him, 'You now exercise authority over Israel. Arise, eat food, and let your heart be cheerful. I will give you the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite.'" And she did. Now, she didn't say to Ahab, "We need to build a gallows 50 cubits high." But what she did was she went out and she got two men who were willing to lie and set it up so that they would lie about Naboth and say that Naboth had blasphemed, that he had spoken evil, had cursed God and the king. And because of that, he had two witnesses testifying to that. He was found guilty and he was put to death. And then she said, now you go take that vineyard. Now, to me, that's a lot what's happening here to Haman. He's upset. He won't eat. And his wife, says, why don't you build a gallows 50 cubits high and go ask the king to hang Mordecai on it. And then go to the dinner and be happy. Just like Jezebel, eat and enjoy yourself. And it's going to come about by having someone put to death. So the gallows for hanging Mordecai was built. And then you'll be able to go to that dinner and be happy. Now, there's some interesting things to me here about this in regard to that. It just happened. That very night, it just happened, the king couldn't sleep. And when he couldn't sleep, what did he do? Well, it just happened because he couldn't sleep. He sent for the musicians to come in and play their instruments and sing and ease his conscience and allow him to go back to sleep. No. What he did was he called for them to bring in the records of the Chronicles and read to him. I don't know about y'all. If you have a hard time going to sleep, you're like, I like to have somebody read history to me. It just happened. It just happened, just by accident. It just happened. No, get too far here. Well, there we go. It's going to happen 4 times here. But it just happened that third time. It just happened that third time. That the place where they read in the Chronicles was where Mordecai had saved the king's life. And so the king said, well, what was done to honor Mordecai for what he done? Well, nothing was done. Well, he needs some advice. And who better to ask advice of than his prime minister? But who's in the court? Now, evidently, this is still early in the morning because the king should be sleeping, but he's not. And they say, Haman. It just happened that Haman happened to be there early in the morning. No. He went there early in the morning for a reason. Why did he go to see the king? What was he going for? Get the king's permission to put Mordecai to death. And he was so sure of that, he has already built the gallows for killing him. After all, if I've gotten his permission to kill off a whole nation, it ain't going to be no problem to get him to kill one person. But he goes there early in the morning because he wants to be the first one there to see the king. Before any other business comes up and any other decisions have to be made, I want to speak to the king first. And that's why I'm there. And so the king then gives a command. Bring Haman in. And so Haman comes in and the king questions him about that. Now, I put up here this title here, It Couldn't Just Happen. That's the name of a book I have. It's a book on Christian evidences. And it talks about a lot of things about the earth, things that people that study science would know about, but I'm not all that familiar with. The earth is on an axis at 23 degrees. And this book points out, had it been less than that or more than that, earth would be uninhabitable. And it goes on and it mentions about 5 or 6 different things about the earth that if it was off just a little bit, you couldn't have life on this planet. And so what the evolutionist says is, they call this the great accident. These things just happened. It just happened that way, and it was perfect for life. You don't find it on any other planets. You look at all the other planets in our solar system, and why you can't have life there. Only the earth is suited for that. And so, that idea, it couldn't just happen. It couldn't just happen because God planned it that way. And the same thing is true here in regard here to this in the book of Esther. These events that are occurring didn't just happen by accident. They happened because God planned it that way. This is God's dealings to bring about the salvation of His people. He's having these things work out the way He wants it to work out in order that His people can be saved. Everybody in the city of Susa knew about the providential blessings of the Jews. Now that had been shown already. What had happened in regard to the Jews in Persia that would show the providential care of God? Let's see if I put this verse on the screen. I don't know if I did or not. Oh yeah, there we go. 2 Chronicles. Oop. 2 Chronicles 36, 22 and 23. Now in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, so that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom and also put it in writing, saying, Thus says Cyrus, king of Persia, all the kingdoms of the earth the Lord God of heaven has given me, and He has commanded me to build Him a house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah, who is among all His people. May the Lord His God be with him, and let him go up. Jeremiah had prophesied that Israel would be in slavery for 70 years in Babylon. And at the end of 70 years, they would be set free. And that came about because God Himself stirred up the heart of Cyrus. And Cyrus acknowledged, it's the God of Israel that's wanted me to build Him this house. And so I'm sending His people, all of His people that want to go back and rebuild that city and the house of God. And so the people of Susa, the capital of the Persian Empire, they knew about this. They knew what King Cyrus had done. And so they knew about the providential care of God. And so when Haman comes there and into the king, and the king says to him, what could the king do to honor the person that he wants to honor? And being the humble man that he is, Haman says, who would the king want to honor more than me? There's that pride again. But he thinks, and so because of that, he tells the king what he wants to be done for him. Think, the king's talking about me, so here's what I want the king to do for me. And so he has certain things that he requests here of the king to honor him. See, I'm getting behind on this. Number one, he says, let a royal robe be brought which the king has worn. Now, he's going to go on later and going to tell him, this person you want, you put that robe on him. What's so important about wearing the robe of the king? And it's a robe that the king himself has worn. What's that? Yeah, it's better than an autograph. In all likelihood, the people are going to recognize that garment. They've seen the king wear it. And now, lo, here's Haman wearing it. And that would really be unusual. Any other time, that would almost be like Haman asking for his life. Because nobody was allowed to wear the robe of the king except the king himself. And even when maybe that robe has seen its best days and the king's putting that aside for something new, nobody is allowed to put on that old robe. That's a kingly garment and only the king can wear it. But Haman's thinking, yeah, if you want to honor this man, you really want to put on a kingly robe on him, one you've worn. And see, that's going to identify Haman then to the people as being like the king himself. But in addition to that, he says, let a horse on which the king has ridden, which has a royal crest placed on its head, be brought. So you got to have a horse now that the king has ridden. Well, how do you know the king's ridden that horse? Well, if you look, this is from the New King James Version. It says, "Let a horse on which the king has ridden, which has a royal crest placed on its head, be brought." Evidently, there was a way of identifying that horse as belonging to the king. It had that royal crest on it. And so, not only am I going to be dressed like the king, but I'm going to be riding on the king's horse, and everybody's going to know that. Now, there's another possibility, though, in the translation that's given here. Come on now. The first one there, that's the one I just read. That's the New King James. But Young's literal translation of this says, "Let them bring in royal clothing that the king hath put on himself, and a horse on which the king hath ridden, and that the royal crown be put on his head." So it may have been that Haman said, if you really want to honor this man, you put on a robe that you yourself have worn. And you bring out a horse that you've ridden on and put him on that horse. And you put a crown, the royal crown, the king's crown, put on him. And now, Haman is really going to be identified by the people as someone who is like the king himself. He's wearing a kingly robe, riding on the king's horse, and he's got the king's crown on his head. Now, there's one other thing. I don't know if I put this passage up here, but didn't. I want us to read it that helps to identify this as being an important thing here about him riding on the king's horse. Okay. All right. Do have that here. Let me may have to skip ahead to get to it. But remember now, when David is an old man and he's near death, and one of his sons, Adonijah, takes it upon himself to declare himself to be king. He gets Joab, who's been the head of David's army, and he's gotten one of the priests to come with him, and they're all invited out. Everybody's invited except Bathsheba's not invited. One of the high priest was not invited, and the prophet Nathan was not invited. And it's because what Adonijah is planning, he's got all these people together, and he has himself anointed and has all the people declare him to be king. And the people all give a shout. Well, when Nathan finds out about that, he comes to Bathsheba and he says to her, "Do you not know what Adonijah has done? He's making himself to be king. And did not David swear to you that your son Solomon would be king after him?" Now he says, "Let me give you some counsel. Let me tell you what you need to do. You go to King David and you tell David, you said, 'David, didn't you promise me that my son, your son Solomon, would be the king after you? And now Adonijah has made himself to be king.'" And so Nathan says, "When you've said that, then I'm going to come in right behind you. And I'm going to emphasize to the king that what you said is truth. Adonijah has made himself king." And so, hopefully then, David will take action to prove to everybody that Solomon is the one to be the king, not Adonijah. And so, in 1 Kings chapter 1, verse 32 and 34, if someone will turn to that for us, 1 Kings chapter 1, verse 32 to 34. Who's got that? Yeah, verses 32 through 34.
Then King David said, "Call to me Zadok the priest, Nathan the prophet, and Benaiah the son of Jehoiada." And they came into the king's presence. And the king said to them, "Take with you the servants of your lord, and have my son Solomon ride on my own mule, and bring him down to Gihon. And let Zadok the priest and Nathan the
Notice that latter part there, verse 33. The first thing it says, you take you, the servants of your Lord, and have Solomon my son ride on my own mule. Now, I'm not sure why a mule and not a horse. Usually the horse was used to signify the king in battle, and the mule maybe in a time of peace. But he says, first of all, you have Solomon ride on my mule. Why? Because riding on the king's mule identifies him with the king. And so it was, with Haman. He said, if you want to honor this man, you put him on a royal robe and you put him on the king's horse to identify him with that. And so that's part of it. And then he says, once you've done that, you've got him dressed in the king's robe, maybe wearing the king's crown, sitting on the king's horse, you get one of your noblest leaders in your country, and you have him go and get Mordecai and put him on a horse and lead him out through the city, and you cry out to the people, this is what the king does with the man he wants to honor. Now, that all had to sound pretty good to Haman up to the point when Haman had told him all of this, that's what he needed to do. And then the king says, you go immediately and get Mordecai. And you do this for him and don't leave out anything that you've said. You make sure you carry through. You do all of this. Put him on my robe, put him on my horse with my crown, and lead him out, and you've got to be the one to go out before him and tell everybody this is what the king does to the man he wants to honor. Now, you talk about a man who's reached the heights of it, being brought low. Instead of hanging that man that he cannot love, he despises, instead of hanging him, I'm going to have to put him above myself and honor him and lead him through the streets crying all out. Yes, sir, Ben.
He doesn't just say, go get Mordecai. He says, Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate, which is the same thing that Haman had said earlier back in verse 13. He said, I can't be happy with those people sitting at the king's gate.
Yeah. He had a position of honor there, as it was. But, this has got to be more galling than anything could ever happen to Haman. The one person he considered to be his greatest enemy, the one his plans are to hang that very day, is now the one he's got to honor. And he's got to do it before everybody. It'd be one thing if I had to do it in private. If I get Mordecai and bring him in there where the king is and have that put on and dress him up like the king, and then say, this is how the king likes to honor those who love. He's got to do it out before the whole city. And so everybody's got to say, they know his hatred for Mordecai and his hatred for the Jews because they know his plans for them. And now he's got to sit there and honor this man. All right, our time is gone. It's a little bit past 8. So Lord willing, we'll begin at this point next week, talk about this and the outcome of what's going to happen because of all this done. So let's have a word of prayer and we'll be dismissed. Father, we are grateful and thankful we've had this time again together, and we pray you'll dismiss us in your care. Bless us and help us, Father, that we'll be concerned about serving Thee to the very best of our abilities. And help us, Father, to be mindful of the dangers of pride in life, to avoid it, and to do our best to humbly submit ourselves to Thee and to service to Thee. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.